So we have the front of our jacket here. We still haven't done down the center front here, so we're going to do that now, and then we'll start at work on the hem. So because you obviously need this to turn back on itself, what we're going to do is just fold it back all the way. So this is joined down here. So we're just sewing the right side to the right side. Now I know I've left that little gap there, and I'll do that after I sew down the front here. So I have a 1 centimeter seam allowance down the front. Sometimes, depending on your fabric, it could be a 6 millimeter seam, but I've given it 1 centimeter just to add a little bit of extra support for the front of the jacket. So I'm holding that there and finding the center halfway down. Raw edges together, of course. Now this has been done so that the jacket has an extension. It actually has a 1.5 centimeter extension. If you've got a zip down the front here, you can follow the instructions. There's instructions for a bomber jacket that has a zip down the front. So we've sewn that, and now what we'll do is we're going to fold this back, that seam back, and now we're going to stitch across here. I think what we might do is just fold it there, and so that the seam underneath is actually going in the right direction, we're just going to do this. Okay, so I've held that back, and now to do that corner, just to show you, what I do is get my fingers in here, push the seam allowance to the inside towards the facing, and then pop that corner out. And we have our nice corner there. So that's there. So back down to the hem again. Where are we? Here we go. So this is the hem. And you'll see here, now this is a bit weird because we've got this short here, but this bit sticking out here. But really, all we're going to do, we're going to turn that seam allowance back towards the facing. And stitch this at 1 centimeter. And there should be, from this raw edge here of the extension to this raw edge, that's 2 centimeters. So what we do is we stitch to this point here so that we intersect the stitch line at 1 centimeter. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the hem, we're going to pull that hem up to touch the top of the hem here, and we're going to continue to sew in a straight line. Once I get there, so that's that. So it does seem a bit weird, but when I pull it through to show you, it'll make more sense. So fold your corner in. And you might just need a little bit there just to make it a nice square corner. So then we have on the inside of the garment, so what's happened now is this is where our lining joins the facing. We've stitched across, and then we've gone from this point up to the side seam there. And what's going to happen is that this is going to create a pleat. So we've got the pleat coming down here, and this has to be the same length because there's no pleat there, but the pleat gets bigger as it goes along. Okay, and that extra bit of hem that we have in there is just adding another little bit of extra body rather than just having like a seam allowance here. It just gives it a little bit more security or firmness in the front of the jacket there. Okay, so on the other side, I won't go through this as slowly. I'll just sort of show you. So we're folding the facing back onto itself. One centimetre seam allowance we're doing here. Now, something that I didn't mention before and which would be good now is to actually take this seam to the sewing machine and press that seam open. If you press it open, when you fold it through, you get a much sharper crease here. So sorry I didn't mention that before, but if you're just watching the video and you haven't started, yeah, you can press that seam open. So I'll stop, I'll give that a press, and then we'll continue. So you can see this, I pressed that open, and it just means now, see how it's nice and flat, and when you fold it there and press it, you get a much crisper, sharper edge, whereas on the other side, where I haven't, I'm going to have to use my fingers, which is a bit tricky because the interfacing is sticking to itself. So you can see that it's a little bit harder to do it nicely here. And you can't get all the way in there because we've already stitched across the bottom. So if you wanted to, if you get to this point and you realize that you haven't pressed it because of me, you could actually unpick that little bit there and go back and press that, and that will be a good idea. And not too much work for a better effect. Okay, so up the top here, and even though I pressed that open, I can still fold this at the top. So fold that across towards the facing side. So just finishing that bit there, and then popping in fingers. And popping that corner out. So this is our other hem on the left hand side. So the front of the jacket here, the facing, so we fold the facing back so that the edge of the facing, now it goes 2 centimeters past this point here, and then we're going to start sewing from the side seam here. So we match this up, so 2 centimeters here, and we're sewing along that hem, this point here. And then this seam allowance, like I said before, even though we pressed it open, we can still fold the seam allowances to the facing side. Okay. So to bag out this corner here, we're just going to fold this seam allowance up, and it'll fold up towards the facing. I'm just going to pop this corner out here. So there is a little bit of fabric in there, so it'll take a little bit of tweaking to get it all out. So we've got a nice sharp corner there. Okay, so there's our back hem, and we have a 5 centimeter hem at the side seam. So what we're going to do now, actually what we might do is we might sew this just like another 5 centimeters so that we can actually tack the side seam here up to the side seam of the hem onto the, tack that onto the side seam there. And we can just pull this back on itself. So if you're very clever, actually, why don't we just see how far we can go? So there, I've done about 15 centimeters there. And while I've got that open, I'm going to fold this up. Oh, and I forgot to press the hem up. I was going to press a 5 centimeter hem up. Okay, so I've come to the machine, to the iron, because I forgot to press my hem up, which gives us a good guide for when we come to do the back of the hem later. So you'll see here, so this is pressed across to this corner. And then what I've done here, because there's a centimetre seam allowance there, I've measured 4 centimetres up from the fold to that seam there. And then if we go along a bit further, I can actually measure this up. Oh yes, don't let the iron sit on the ironing board like that, Mark. Another one too. Okay, so I've got a nice sharp line there.